Hello, good evening, CGSE Class 67. We are now going to kickstart our policy and strategy module. Now, the Polstrat module will actually formally begin on the 25th of May, but we decided to teach two subjects in advance, namely the strategic theories and concepts in military policy and strategy, and the National Military Strategy Framework. Both these lectures will be given by yours truly and Colonel Poley. And because we are going to be delivering these two lectures in advance, the proper course orientation will still be given to you on the 25th. Now, there's another lecture, which is the National Military Policy, NSP 2017 to 2022, but we decided not to lecture it anymore. This will be given to you as a required reading because you are going to go back to it every now and then during the progress of this course. So please read it because it will serve as one of your references. And it might also be useful for you when you start doing your commandant's paper. Okay, so let's begin. So this lecture will concentrate on theories and concepts. And there are so many theories and concepts that we will be discussing here. In fact, each of these theories and concepts actually demand an entire lecture just to explain them. But I will try my best to cover as much ground as possible, and I will try to be as thorough as possible. Okay, the face that you see here is not Aristotle. This is Thucydides. Try to be familiar with him and try to remember his name, how to spell it, and try to remember the quote because we are going to go back to it often throughout our lecture on theories and the concepts on policies and strategies. So he's the father, considered to be the father of history. And he chronicled the First Peloponnesian War, and he observed that it was the rise of Athens and the fear that this inspired in Sparta that made war inevitable. Now, an interest in Thucydides has reemerged recently because of a book written by Graham Allison entitled Destined for War, wherein he introduces the concept of the Thucydides trap, wherein a rising power will eventually come into conflict with an established power, making war inevitable. Okay, so try to remember that concept as we go on with the lecture. Since this lecture is supposed to be delivered ahead of public policy analysis, I decided that it's only proper for me to explain the differences and the relationships between policy and strategy. Okay, so policies are guidelines or paths of action to reach goals, while strategies are major courses of action or patterns of successful action to achieve these objectives. So the differences here is that policies involve decision making or involve decisions that an organization or in this case, nation states would take in order to fulfill its interests, while strategies are plotting out courses of action in order for these organizations or countries to achieve objectives. So here are the basic differences in a nutshell between policies and strategies. As you can see from this table that you see here, okay, policies are statements or commonly accepted understandings of decision making, while when you talk about strategies, these are ends, ways, and means in order for countries, organizations, as such, to achieve the objectives as stated in policies. So policies are thought-oriented, whereas strategies are action-oriented. Okay, policies are declarations for the subordinates to implement. They are articulations of what the organization wants to happen. And in strategy, it is in the implementation. Everyone within the organization is empowered to implement strategy. So in policy in general is concerned with courses of action, okay? While strategies, as I said a while ago, declare ends, ways, and means to achieve these objectives. So the question is, among the two, which comes first? So A step before planning is decision making. This means that policy making must come first, and then strategic planning can come later. So policy making is related to the first act, which is decision making. Remember this relationship because this will also come out later when we enter into our operational art and joint operations planning process. Okay. So to explain it further, it all begins with political objectives, and we develop national strategies in order for the country or the nation to achieve these political objectives in furtherance of national interest. And below that are supporting strategies. Now, these supporting strategies may not always be military; they may be diplomatic, informational, or economic strategies, all of which form part of this structure in order for a nation to fulfill its political objectives in furtherance of national interest. And to explain further, okay, it begins with the political policy, or in the context of this lecture, foreign policy, all geared towards achievement of the goals of the nation state. Below it, you have grand strategy, or the subjugation of the state for the provision of resources to support national interest. And then these two concepts below it are familiar to all of you. You have at the operational level, okay, competing demands of enforcing the goals required by grand strategy within tactical capabilities and constraints. And the lowest level is the tactical level, achieving operational goals through efficient military action. So now we see two levels here. Okay, we see at the policy making level, in which case, in the context of this lecture, we're talking about foreign policy. We're talking about international relations, how states behave with other states, and the level below it, we are going to talk about theories on military strategy. But first, we will begin here. Our understanding of policies and strategies have to begin with the theories and concepts that shape national policies. So we begin with the theories of international relations. And here we will be talking about the three major schools of thought, or the three major paradigms in IR, which are realism, liberalism, and constructivism. First, let's talk about realism, which is the oldest school of thought, or the oldest paradigm in IR. And actually, realism can trace its roots all the way back to Thucydides. According to the realist school of thought, you have states as the main actors, or states are acting as unitary actors. What do we mean when we say unitary actors? That means states make decisions as a whole. It recognizes the fact that within states there are different personalities, but the state, when it makes a decision, it makes a decision unitary. It makes a decision as a whole. So it is also right to say that states are the main actors in realism theory, where the goal of each state is to maximize national interest, or the pursuit of power is the ultimate goal of every state as a unitary actor. Another concept that governs the approach of realism is that the state exists in a system of anarchy, or the concept of anarchy, which is the absence of any world government. Now, when we say anarchy, it does not necessarily mean chaos, that there is perpetual turbulence. No, anarchy in the context of IR simply means that there is no established world government. Now, it does not mean to say that states do not recognize the presence of the United Nations as supranational bodies, but it is not the same to say that the United Nations acts as a governing body that compels states to toe the line or to behave. No, when we talk about global anarchy, that means that in this world there are no laws that compel states to act the way they do. Unlike individuals here in individuals existing within the state, wherein there is a government and the government can actually compel law and order, compel in obedience to rules and laws. That does not exist in the international system. You have a system of anarchy wherein countries are expected to help themselves. Okay, so you have the concept of the self-help. Countries are expected to defend themselves. In order for a state to feel secure, the state arms itself. And in so doing, it will lead other states, particularly those states that are their traditional rivals, to feel unsafe. And so they will also arm themselves as well. And this is what is known as the security dilemma. Actions taken by a state to increase its own security will cause reactions from other states, which will in turn lead to a decrease rather than an increase of the state security. And then now we go back to the concept of the Thucydides trap, wherein a rising power will eventually collide with an existing power or an established power. And this is what is known as the Thucydides trap. Okay, wherein in an international system, in a system of anarchy, conflict is inevitable. So once again, when you talk about realism, the ultimate goal of states is power, and the relationship between states is a struggle for power. So world politics, you can say, is all about the accumulation of relative power, and the means by which states pursue their national objectives is through one, military, and second is through diplomacy. The diplomacy for the purpose of balancing national interest. So from the realist perspective, in the system of anarchy, because of the security dilemma, conflict is inevitable. And because conflict is inevitable, I will have to arm myself. I will have to strengthen my defense position. And in so doing, other states will feel unsafe. Now, liberalism, on the other hand, argues that the security dilemma can be overcome through cooperation and cooperative action. And here they recognize the importance of non-state actors like non-government organizations, like other international entities like the United Nations. So the main theme here is that humans are perfectible. Democracy is essential and ideas matter. So sovereignty in this case is not as important as global interdependence. And here they recognize the importance of non-state actors. So the state is not the only actor. You also have non-government organizations. You have supranational organizations like the United Nations. So liberalism pays special importance to a rules-based international order. And the primary tools for cooperative activity is through diplomatic, economic, environment, and the military means. And national interest is not determined by states alone, but also involves the role of the elites. So if you go back again to the realists, for them, what really matters is relative power vis-a-vis their traditional rivals, whereas for liberals, they focus on shared power or leading through absolute gains. The third paradigm is constructivism, and this theory posits that knowledge is constructed, meaning that foreign policy is determined by one state's perception of the other. Therefore, how one state deals with another depends on the subjective view whether that state is a friend or is a foe. Furthermore, this subjectivity can be transformed through state and individual individual interaction. So this is a departure from the realist perspective, which assumes that states simply seeks to survive. The constructivist says that interests and identities of states are malleable. That means they can be changed, and they are products of specific historical process. According to Alexander Wendt, anarchy is what states make it. Therefore, constructivism explains how norms and alliances are being challenged or modified. So to put it simply, from a constructivist perspective, conflict is actually a construct, such as uh, cooperation is also a construct. That means it only takes it only takes a change of idea. Another good example here is the fall of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union suddenly decided it no longer wants to be a superpower and decided to break up its states. Okay, so that is an example of constructivism at work. Okay, next we will be talking about the two schools of security studies. Here we will be talking about the traditional school and the Widener school, or the Copenhagen school of Barry Buzan. Okay, the traditional school states that the state is the referent object. That means that security is equated to the security of the state, and that national security is also equated to military security. So the focus here is on internal and external threats. This has been the traditional perspective of security for a long time, up until the Copenhagen School, which was proposed by Barry Buzan. It's also known as the Widener School, wherein securitization, or how what one describes as a security problem, goes through a process of moving an issue from regular day-to-day politics into the security sphere. This is also the process of widening the net in terms of how we define a certain issue to be a security issue. Okay, so there are elements in the securitization process. Okay, understanding the context. Okay, identifying the agent, and identifying also, or engaging the audience in order for us to securitize a certain issue. Okay, so there are certain sectors that are included in the Widener school. Traditionally, you've always had the military sector, but now we've also added the following, which also forms part of the security sectors, which are economic, political, societal, and environmental. Okay, so what is the securitizing agent? Okay, the securitizing agent is basically the authority to identify a threat and who needs protection. Okay, who needs protection is also known as the referent object. Like, for example, when you talk about COVID-19, okay, the COVID-19 is not a traditional security. It's not a traditional security issue, but it has been securitized. It has been securitized because there was a securitizing agent, or there was an entity that decided that this is no longer a health issue. This is no longer covered under, or it can no longer be answered through day-to-day politics. And it has to be elevated from a non-political issue to a political issue, and later it's going to be elevated from a political issue to a security issue. And when you talk about audience, you're talking about the people who approve the policies. And this might mean anybody from the general public, or in many cases, the selected elites who decide whether this particular issue is to be securitized. So from here, you will see a departure from the traditional school of security studies, which is purely military, and you now have a widened definition of security, which includes political, economic, societal, and environmental sectors, to include also the military. So these two schools of security studies are essential in order for us to understand our own policies, our own national security policies, and national defense policies. Okay, so next we are going to talk about geopolitical theories. This refers to the effects of geographical positions and of other geographical features on the foreign policy of a state and its relation to other states. Okay, it is concerned with the strategic value of geographic factors, namely resources, access to the sea, etc. So we have three major geopolitical theories: the Heartland theory by Halford Mackinder, Rimland theory by Nicholas Spikeman, and sea power theory by Alfred T. Mahan. So the first geopolitical theory that we will discuss is the Heartland theory. This was proposed in 1904 by Halford Mackinder. Okay, and he states that a nation who controls the heartland, as you can see in the picture, the heartland is also known as the pivot area, okay, which is located here at Central Asia. Okay. And he says that the nation in control of the heartland had the potential to conquer the world. So here in Mackinder's concept, he separates the world into two islands. He calls this area as the world island, which consists of Africa, Europe, and Asia. That's the world island. And the outer islands, he identifies them as North and South America and Australia. So he who controls the heartland controls the world island. And he who controls the world island controls the world. So the heartland theory is an example of a land-based power theory. And this has been used by many people throughout history, namely Napoleon and Hitler. So what was the basis for Mackinder's conclusion that the control of the heartland was essential? He believed that he who controls the heartland could outproduce the outlying countries of the rimland and the outer islands. He also observed that the terrain of the heartland was unrestricted. It's vast land with no obstacles. And what do vast areas come to signify? It means that a vast area with no obstacles means that countries or nations could occupy it. And normally, an area with no obstacles signify that this area is occupied by just one state. And that state has conquered other nations just to occupy this state. So the next theory is the Rimland theory by Spikeman. And this was an offshoot of the Heartland theory. And according to Spikeman, he believed that whoever controlled the rimland or the land surrounding the heartland would eventually control the heartland. And by controlling the heartland, control also the world island. And the reason why Spikeman believed in this is because he believes that the rimland had access to more trade routes and had greater freedom of action, greater movement around the world because it had access to the sea. Okay, and access to the sea meant they had more access to natural resources, and by doing that, they had more resources. They could build more armies, and they can actually outmaneuver the heartland. So basically, he's right because resources like coal and oil, they're found in the rimland. And if you try to analyze this, if you look at the portion here where the heartland meets the rimland, this is known as a buffer zone. And in this buffer zone, what do you find here? You find here conflict. So you have here parts of Asia, parts of Arabia, Afghanistan, Southeast Asia, China, Korea. Okay. The areas here where the heartland meets the rimland has historically been the site of many conflicts around the world. So the conflict that you see here between the heartland and the rimland is also consistent with Thucydides' theory that there's always a clash between rising powers and established powers. There's another book that I would highly recommend for you to read in order for you to understand fully geopolitics. Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. Okay, if you can get a hold of this book, please read it. And I think the audiobook is also available on YouTube. Now, the third geopolitical theory is the sea power theory by Alfred T. Mahan. And according to him, command of the sea allowed command over the world's highways. And whoever controlled the highways would control the course of international relations. So as you can see here, whichever country who had the superior navy and had control over the sea lanes or control over the world's highways, had the potential of outmaneuvering the rimland. So the nation that commanded the sea had freedom of action, and it could also restrict the freedom of action of other countries with the heartland and the rimland. So these are just some theories. Okay, so you have theories of international relations, the two schools of thought in terms of security studies, and geopolitical theories. These are theories that help shape national policies. These are theories that help shape foreign policies, and which belongs at the highest level of our analysis when it comes to military strategies and policies. Okay. So next, we are going to discuss theories and concepts that shape military strategies. Okay, so you've heard this before. Strategy comes from the Greek word strategos, meaning generalship. Strategy began in the military. It's the art of the general. Okay, but the more expanded definition of General Helmut von Moltke, it is the practical adaptation of the means placed at a general's disposal to the attainment of an object in view. Okay. It is basically the ends, ways, and means in order for you to achieve objectives. So according to Randall Bowdish, who was a naval officer, there are 5 basic strategies that have been used throughout history. The strategies of extermination, exhaustion, annihilation, intimidation, and subversion. So in his study on strategic theories and concepts, he identified the theorists and practitioners of military strategy, beginning with the master strategist, Sun Tzu, the early annihilators from the annihilator strategy, Karl von Clausewitz on war, Baron von Jomini, the exhausters, Frederick the Great and Hans Delbruck, the subverters, Marx, Engels, and Lenin, to include Mao Zedong, the modern annihilators, Basil Liddell-Hart and John Boyd. And as an added bonus, he also mentions the emerging unrestricted warfare strategy by PLA Colonels Liang and Jiang Sui. So the first of the 5 basic strategies is the strategy of extermination, which he describes as how military means and concepts of employment are used to achieve extirpation or eradication of a group of people. Okay. Now, as a strategy, this is considered nowadays to be immoral and is contrary to international law. However, there have been examples in history where the strategy of extermination has been used, although it has been said that military theorists have avoided the strategy of extermination in their discussion on strategy and war theory. Some notable examples of the policy of the strategy of extermination are in the Punic War between Rome and Carthage between 264 to 146 BC. The senator, the Roman senator, Cato the Elder, in every speech that he made to the Senate, regardless of the subject, it would always end up with Carthage must be destroyed. And true enough, after the Second Punic War, Rome wiped out Carthage from the map. Not a single structure, not a single survivor of Carthage made it after the Second Punic War. See, Genghis Khan used this strategy quite effectively in conquering the Central Asia and China. In many cases, he would exterminate entire communities of people and would leave a survivor just to spread the story to other communities, to other nations, to other states, with the intent that once the reputation of Genghis Khan would be spread throughout, they would be intimidated into surrendering without a fight. Another example is the Athenians against the Melians in the Peloponnesian War. Athens warned the city of Melos that if they refused to join forces with Athens, they would wipe out the entire city, and they eventually did. The initial intent was to to intimidate the city of Melos through extermination. And it did not even reach, it did not even get to intimidation because they went through with their plan to exterminate. Okay, so nowadays the strategy of extermination is condemned by the United Nations after the Holocaust of World War II. The second military strategy is the strategy of exhaustion, okay, and which is basically a strategy emphasizing the gradual and often indirect erosion of the enemy's military power and will to resist. This was the Oxford Dictionary definition. Okay, it's the death of 1,000 cuts, physically and psychologically weakening the adversary over a long course of time. Okay, now this strategy favors the weaker side because it does not require a preponderance of force, but it does demand a lot of perseverance and a great deal of resolve. Okay. This strategy seeks to avoid the decisive battle, except when the conditions favor the weaker side, when victory is assured. This is also known as the Fabian strategy. It is named after Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus. So instead of facing Hannibal in a decisive battle, Fabius altered Rome's strategy from annihilation to exhaustion. While he was trailing Hannibal, Fabius maintained his own freedom of action and started attacking Hannibal and depleted his strength by constantly harassing his foraging parties. Eventually, the weakened army of Hannibal was defeated in the Battle of Cannae. This was also the strategy employed by George Washington in the American Revolution, by employing militiamen to constantly harass British forces, weakening them until the Continental Army achieved victory. The next strategy is the strategy of annihilation, which sets out to attack the armed forces and destroy them and impose the will of the conqueror to the conquered. That's the Hans Delbruck definition. Okay. The assumption here is that as long as the enemy has the will to resist, it will resist. And of course, Karl von Clausewitz has a lot to say about this. Okay. If it follows then that to overcome the enemy or to disarm him, it must always be the aim of warfare. So again, according to Clausewitz, there are two types of annihilation. Okay, there's annihilation through attrition and annihilation through dislocation, which are aimed at either their physical object or psychological object, respectively. Okay, we will discuss this further. Okay, when we talk about centers of gravity. So the two examples of these types of attrition can be seen here in the example of General Ulysses S. Grant, when he directed two-pronged approaches. The first was when he directed General Meade to defeat General Lee's army at the Battle of Gettysburg, which is the physical object or the annihilation through attrition. At the same time, he also ordered General Sherman to march to Georgia and take the heart of the Confederate forces. And this was the psychological object, which was fulfilling the annihilation through dislocation. Okay, the fourth strategy is the strategy of intimidation. Okay, and it's defined as to compel or to deter from some action by threat or of violence. Okay, so this is most effective when it is used to take an object intact without fighting, and it requires a demonstration of physical power to achieve credibility or to achieve to attain fear in the mind of the enemy. Okay? So there are two versions of the strategy of intimidation: compellence and deterrence. When we talk about compellence, it means to seek or intimidate the enemy into giving up a political objective. And some examples of that is terrorism. Okay, it's an example of intimidation through compellence. The other is the intimidation through deterrence, which generally seeks to intimidate the adversary into inaction. An example of that is the Cold War. And the last among these strategies is the strategies of subversion, which is undermining or detachment of loyalties of significant political social groups within the victimized state and their transference under ideal conditions to the symbols and institutions of the aggressor. Okay. So it basically means transferring of loyalties from one group to the state to the loyalties to the aggressor. Okay, and it requires the active support of the elites, or sometimes the passive acceptance of the masses. If it cannot be achieved that they will, it cannot be expected that they will have their partial or full support. So this is a high reward, low cost strategy if you compare it to the use of armed forces. Because here you're not using armed forces, you're using smaller entities. However, it is also argued that this strategy can take a very long time to achieve its political objective. So the strategy of subversion is the foundation for three other types of conflicts: revolutions, coups d'etats, and guerrilla warfare. So from a study of these five strategies, you will see a wide range of options that fall between the physical to the psychological effects of war. And here on this graph, you will see how these five strategies are related to the different types of warfare. So if you look at the top part, you will see how the strategy of extermination is at the most extreme in terms of physical effects. And the strategy of subversion is also at the rightmost extreme to purely psychological effects. And these strategies also dovetails with the array of the types of warfare in terms of their effects. At the most extreme, you have genocide, and at the most psychological, you have revolutions and coups. Okay, so as an added bonus, we are also going to discuss unrestricted warfare. Okay, so back then, when the early military theorists and strategists they focused on separate and distinct theories of strategy such as annihilation, exhaustion, subversion, etc. They determined these strategies as a ways to achieve policy objectives, but they were all bounded by customs and the rules of war. Now, unrestricted warfare was the brainchild of two People's Liberation Army colonels, Colonels Qiao Liang and Wang Xiangshui. Okay? So, unrestricted warfare suggests that there are tactics which a nation can take in order for them to compensate for the lack of military capability or inferiority when it comes to a high-tech war. Okay, they enumerate the following. Okay, they enumerate hacking into their adversaries' websites, sabotage of financial institutions, terrorism, using the law, using media, conducting urban warfare as proposed methods of balancing power between the inferior state and the superior state. Okay? So, according to them, the first rule of unrestricted warfare is that there are no rules, or there is nothing. Nothing is forbidden. Expanding on this, Kiao also asserts that strong countries normally would not use the same approach used by weaker countries, because the strong countries, they make the rules, while the rising ones tend to break the rules. Okay, and the rising countries exploit the loopholes. So the stronger countries have to observe its own rules. Otherwise, the whole world would lose trust in them. So additionally, unrestricted warfare mentions other types of warfare like psychological warfare, okay, smuggling, drug warfare, okay, network warfare, technological warfare, fabrication, resource warfare, and cultural warfare, and also international law warfare. So shown here are some examples or some descriptions of how unrestricted warfare is being used or being employed. Okay, so we've come to the end of our lecture. So for the past few minutes, we've talked about the differences between policy and strategy. We talked about the theories and concepts that shape national policies. We discussed the three main IR theories: the theory of the realist, the liberalist, and the constructivist perspectives in international relations. Okay, so when we talk about realism, we're discussing the states as unitary actors, and that the states exist in the international system, which is characterized by anarchy. And in a system of anarchy, no other state can help each other but themselves. And by so doing, they try to accumulate power. And by accumulating power, they try to defend themselves, and which leads to a security dilemma. And that the antithesis to that is the liberalist theory of IR, and they say that the conflict is not inevitable, and they say that uh, the it can be overcome through cooperative agreement. And constructivist theory discusses that the concept of anarchy is what states make it, and that ideas matter, and the constructivist would uh, change the world in the way that they would also change constructs. We also talked about uh, two security the two security schools of thought, which is the traditional school and the Widener school or the Copenhagen school. We've discussed also the three major theories in geopolitics: the heartland theory, the rimland, and the sea power theory. And from there, we moved on to military strategies, discussing the five major types of military strategies, starting from the strategy of extermination, the strategy of exhaustion, annihilation, uh, subversion, intimidation, and subversion. Okay, and we capped it off with the discussion of unrestricted warfare. So for your ITI on military policy and strategy, we go back to NSP 2017 and 2022. Okay, relate the theories and concepts. Okay, everything that we've talked about to the National Security Policy 2017 to 2022. Okay, is the NSP anchored on any particular theory? Okay, and if so, what is that theory, or what are those theories? Second question. Okay, how does the military strategy concepts explain the present security environment at West Philippine Sea? Okay, so you're trying to use the theory to broaden your understanding of the situation, broaden your understanding of the world. Okay? So, and lastly, okay, given the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific, do you believe that there will be war? Why or why not? Try to use the theories to explain or to justify your answers. Okay, so not more than 3,000 words, and submission is going to be on 25 May. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and I would like to end this lesson with a quote from Sir William Francis Butler. The nation that will insist on drawing a broad line of demarcation between the fighting man and the thinking man is liable to find its fighting done by fools and its thinking done by cowards. Okay. Thank you very much. Have a good day, everyone.